Okay, so let's dive into this. Washington, D.C. has apparently been uh, treated to some pretty unusual sights recently.
Oh, really? What kind of sites?
We're talking posters, like really eye-catching posters. One says, have Elon's next baby.
Wow, okay. Subtle.
Right, and it's got a picture of a woman with a Tesla Cybertruck. But wait, there's more.
Of course there is.
Other posters telling people to live free with a harem of moms in Austin.
A harem of moms in Austin.
Yep. And then there's this really cryptic one, silence is golden.
That one's a bit different.
Totally. And apparently it wasn't just posters. There was even like a physical booth set up in a D.C. park.
Get out! A booth!
Yeah, with more slogans. Have Elon's next kid join Musk's Legion of Mom. And people were actually handing out flyers.
Okay, that's commitment, so people must have been completely bewildered.
Pretty much. We saw a quote from one D.C. resident, anonymous, who basically said, I thought it was an art installation at first, but then I saw the Musk connection. It's wild.
That makes sense. The initial reaction is probably confusion, then maybe amusement, then, oh, it's him.
Exactly. It shows how, certain public figures become so ingrained that even weird stuff linked to them doesn't feel totally impossible.
Right. It sort of taps into his existing public persona.
So for this deep dive, we're looking at districtdrama.com. They were one of the first to really start picking this apart.
And they made it clear they're not involved, right?
Yeah, totally unaffiliated.
Mm.
They've called this whole thing Eugen X.
Mm.
And that's what we're digging into, what District Drama calls a cheeky phenomenon and scandalously funny satire.
All centered around Elon Musk.
The billionaire mastermind, yeah. Tesla, SpaceX.
Yeah.
The guy is a cultural juggernaut.
And his personal life, I mean, it's often in the headlines. The Wall Street Journal mentioned he's fathered, at least 14 children?
Something like that, yeah. So he's constantly in the news professionally, personally.
Mm-hmm.
And it almost makes him a prime target for this kind of thing.
It really does. So the big question, I guess.
Is Eugen X real? Is this a genuine project?
Exactly.
Well, all signs point to. Probably not. Apparently, if you actually go to the Eugen X website and click sign up,
What happens?
you get hit with an image that says, pretty bluntly, EW, gross. Why would you want to have Elon's baby?
Okay, well, that clears things up a bit.
Right, it kind of spells it out. It's satire.
So let's talk about satire then. What exactly is it doing here?
Well, fundamentally, satire uses things like exaggeration, irony, humor to critique something, to expose flaws or absurdities.
Like Jonathan Swift's A Modest Proposal, that was pretty shocking satire.
Exactly. Darkly funny, but making a very sharp point about poverty and indifference. Or think about, Saturday Night Live sketches.
Right, taking real events of people and just amplifying them to ridiculous levels.
Precisely. So what is Eugen X aiming at satire at?
District Drama suggests it's targeting that cult-like devotion that Musk sometimes inspires.
Yeah, you see that online, right? People hanging on his every word, whether it's about AI or, I don't know, his posts on X.
His persona is just so big. Larger than life, maybe? It makes him ripe for this kind of commentary, this exaggeration. Eugen X is basically holding up a distorted mirror.
And maybe it's not just about Musk himself. District Drama hinted it could be a broader critique.
Of tech culture, you mean? Silicon Valley.
Yeah, that whole sometimes male-dominated bro culture.
Yeah.
Questionable priorities, maybe some really outlandish ideas floating around.
The harem of moms thing definitely feels like a jab in that direction. Maybe poking fun at the rumored eccentric lifestyles of some tech billionaires.
When we say bro ethos, we mean that sort of aggressive, disruptive, maybe sometimes dismissive culture, right? Fast growth above all else.
Yeah, that kind of vibe. And Eugen X seems to be playing with that.
What's also clever, though, is how it weaves in Musk's actual stated concerns.
Like the birth rate stuff.
Exactly. He's talked about declining birth rates quite a bit, called it one of the biggest risks to civilization at that Wall Street Journal event back in 2021. CNBC reported on that.
Right. And Newsweek mentioned him warning about mass extinction for countries with low fertility. He's genuinely concerned about this.
So when the Eugen X posters talk about siring a population available to colonize Mars.
It's taking his real SpaceX ambitions and his population concerns and just cranking the absurdity dial way up.
Yeah, it's like hyper-exaggeration, almost cartoonish, like you said.
But it's rooted in something real he's actually said or is known for.
Which makes the satire bite a bit harder, perhaps. It's not just pulled out of thin air.
Definitely. And beyond the humor, there are maybe deeper things being poked at here.
Like celebrity worship.
Yeah, like how invested do people get in these huge public figures? The Legion of Moms name itself suggests that kind of intense, almost cult-like following.
It makes you think about the power dynamics, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and it touches on themes of reproductive ethics and autonomy, too.
Yeah.
Well, framing having children as, like, serving this one billionaire's grand vision, it raises questions about agency, about women's bodies potentially being seen as, resources for someone else's project.
Yeah, that's a pretty heavy implication, even wrapped in satire. It's about commodification, maybe.
Potentially.
Yeah.
It forces you to think about those uncomfortable intersections of power, gender, and ambition, especially when it involves someone so influential.
Okay, let's shift slightly. Austin, Texas. That location keeps coming up in the slogans.
Yeah.
Harem of moms in Austin.
Right, that's not random. Austin's a huge deal for Musk.
Tesla's Gigafactory is there.
And SpaceX has a major presence nearby, too. He's really planted a flag in Texas.
So the Austin line is probably, what, a commentary on that?
Most likely, yeah. It's satirizing the sheer scale of his impact on the region, the influx of tech culture, maybe poking fun at the lifestyle changes happening there. It's exaggerating his growing footprint.
District drama positions Uyghur X pretty firmly within that long history of satire. Yeah.
Yeah, they compare it to the tradition of Swift, or modern stuff like The Onion, using humor to question things, to challenge narratives.
Which feels especially relevant now. With information spreading so fast online, sometimes you don't know what's real.
Exactly. Satire like this can be a tool to cut through the noise, especially when it's about powerful people like Musk. It forces a pause, makes you think.
And doing this in Washington, D.C. specifically, setting up the booth there.
That seems very intentional. DC is the political heartland, a place obsessed with power, influence, messaging.
So launching this kind of spectacle there guarantees maximum attention, maximum dissection.
Pretty much. It's performing the satire on a stage where people are already primed to analyze power plays and bold statements. It fits the environment.
What about the Eugenex website itself? You mentioned it earlier.
Right. District Drama described it as really minimalist, kind of a placeholder.
So it doesn't give much away.
Not really.
Yeah.
Which arguably adds to the whole effect. It keeps the mystery going, fuels the speculation about who's behind it and why.
That ambiguity seems like part of the strategy.
Often is with good satire. It makes the audience do some of the work, interpret the meaning, debate it, keeps the conversation going.
And speaking of conversation, how did people react in D.C. and online?
District Drama noted it was pretty mixed, actually. A real spectrum.
Some people found it funny.
Yeah, definitely. Some were amused, comparing it to The Onion, but, like, in real life.
But others were less comfortable.
Right. Some expressed ethical concerns, felt it was maybe trivializing serious issues around reproduction or reinforcing stereotypes, even in jest.
So humor, but also controversy.
Exactly. And then just plain curiosity. Who made this? What's the real point? Plus a dose of skepticism, obviously.
It really highlights that tightrope satire walks.
It does. It aims to provoke, maybe make you laugh, but it can easily be misinterpreted or hit a nerve. District Drama called it a fine line.
Which brings us to the man himself, Elon Musk. Any speculation on how he might react?
Well, you never know for sure, but
He likes memes, right? He's got that online persona, sometimes self-deprecating humor. Think about his kid's name, some of his jokes.
exactly. So it's plausible he might see the sheer audacity of it and find it kind of funny. He does lean into the eccentric side of his image sometimes.
Yeah.
But as District Drama suggests, being the direct target of such widespread, pointed satire, even if it's funny, might also be a stark reminder of how close admiration can be to caricature.
Yeah, that line between being a visionary and being seen as something else.
It's a very public reflection of how he's perceived, pushed to an extreme.
So stepping back, what's the main point of Voyager X then? What's its function?
At its core, connecting back to those posters, the booth, it's satire. It's not meant to be a real plan.
Its job is to make you think.
Right. To quote District Drama again, it wants you to question authority, scrutinize influence, and laugh at our collective obsessions. By focusing on Musk, it's really commenting on how our society often puts tech leaders on these pedestals.
So the key takeaway, maybe, is that Eugen X is basically a call to think critically. Especially now, when headlines can be so blurry, mixing fact and fiction, or just wild hyperbole.
It's a very strange, maybe provocative way to make that point.
And we can't forget that other slogan, silence is golden. That one felt different.
Yeah, it's more ambiguous. In the context of everything else, maybe it's a comment on not questioning powerful people, like their pronouncements are accepted in silence.
Or maybe a jab at the media frenzy, implying less talk is better.
could be either or both. That ambiguity is part of its satirical power, I think. It lets you project meaning onto it.
It definitely leaves you thinking.
Which leads to a final thought, maybe, for you listening. In this digital age where stuff spreads like wildfire and reality gets blurred, how effective is satire really as a tool to challenge power, to shape how we talk about things?
Yeah. Does it actually change minds or just entertain those who already agree?
And looking around today, what other big societal norms or maybe other really influential figures do you think are just waiting for their own Eugen X moment? What else is ripe for that kind of sharp, satirical look?